It's rivalry week. Miami versus Florida State in Tallahassee for what is set to be a great matchup this weekend. Welcome into another week of the TMH Sportscast alongside Liam Hickey. I'm Zach Cohen. Liam, I don't know about you, but I'm excited for this weekend's game.
This game I'm so pumped for because not only does it have incredible ACC title implications, this game could also determine if we are true national title contenders. That's why, out of all the games we've played so far, I believe Miami versus Florida State will be the hardest opponent that Miami has faced all season. They'll be tougher than Notre Dame. They'll be tougher than Florida, not only just for the way that they play, but also for the intangible factors because the atmosphere will be unlike anything Miami has seen all season. They have not traveled away from Hard Rock for the past 4 games, and now they're going to hostile territory against a crowd that is riled up after not getting game day, and it is going to be absolutely box office to watch.
I'm excited. I'm gonna be in there as a fan, and I know it's gonna be really really loud. But Liam, FSU did play last week. They played Virginia. You want to talk about that game a little bit?
Yeah, I believe we just have to talk about that to start the show because that was probably the game of the year. Just end to end in terms of scoring the entire time. They were just trading touchdowns. You start off with it. FSU goes down early. 2 horrible turnovers, one a fumble on Gavin Sawchuk, and the other a strong side blitz, Tommy Castellanos, in the red zone that he gives up on a pick. Both of those times, Virginia is able to march down the field and score, making it 14-0 early for the Cavaliers at home. But then Chandler Morris, who was awesome in this game, but he was pretty inconsistent in terms of his overall stat line. He had 2 touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, but also 3 interceptions. He made 2 boneheaded interceptions right after he's going 14-0 up to reel it back to 14-14. Then FSU is able to drive back down to the field. Castellanos does a run fake and somersaults off the middle to make it 21-14. And then on the UVA final drive before halftime, they're able to tie it up once again after some horrible missed tackles by FSU, starting off with a reception by Trell Harris, in which DB for FSU, Jerry Wilson, tries to jump the pass, misses it. Trell Harris comes down with it and gets a nice gain that sets up Jamari Taylor nicely, who's able to punch it in after Earl Little. Just a really soft tackle from him. Tries getting up the middle on him and just cannot come down with the tackle. Jamari Taylor skirts by, brings it in for 6, 28-21 going into halftime. And then after that, it only got even better, right? Jake Weinberg, the kicker for FSU, misses a field goal, and that turned out to be pivotal, as we all know. UVA marches down in what was a methodical drive, eating up and milking the clock with an incredible offensive line and a running back core that really just got going in that second half. And that really costed FSU a lot. They go up 28-21. Brady Pittman does a jump pass to make it 28-28. He had a trifecta of touchdowns on the day, had a rushing touchdown, a passing touchdown, and a throwing touchdown, which he had there to tie it up. And then there was a wheel route passing touchdown to Xavier Brown on a 15-yard play to put Virginia up a touchdown once again. And then some more turnovers. FSU was able to tie it up with seconds left in regulation, 40 seconds remaining in the game. Castellanos throws a rope to Pittman, who comes down within the end zone. And then it's overtime, baby. They both trade field goals in the first regulation. And then to cap it all off, the controversial Deuce Robinson bobble after Virginia goes up when Chandler Morris runs in for his 3rd rushing touchdown of the day. Deuce Robinson unable to deliver in a big moment after having an incredible game prior to that, going for 9 receptions, 147 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But on that one, when they needed him most, he bobbled it, left it in the hands of the referees, and they called it a no-catch. Virginia stormed the field in what was an epic moment at Scott Stadium, and here we are now going into this game in what could have been a top-5 matchup that most certainly would have been on College Game Day, but instead, FSU drops it in double overtime, and now they have a loss on their record.
You know, you talk about Deuce Robinson's bobble, and it kind of reminds me last year when Miami played Virginia Tech. They were waiting for a long time to see that call. Obviously, Miami went on to win, but yeah, both quarterbacks for Florida State and Virginia both had more than 1 interception, so it's inconsistent, allowing that defense to really get in the game. And yeah, that was kind of really what happened.
Yeah, for some takeaways, I'd say there are a lot of positives and negatives to take away from Florida State's performance if you're a Miami fan that was hate watching like I was on Friday night. One of them being that there are some glaring weaknesses in FSU's rush defense that this Virginia O-line was able to just pick apart, and that especially came true in the second half when they ran 30 times for 130 yards and in the 2 overtimes. And one of them, they just kept eating up the clock. That was on the Xavier Brown wheel route touchdown to make it up 35-28, and then also to tie it up at 28, I believe, in the third quarter for their touchdown when they ran it all the way there. On that specific drive, 11 of their 12 plays were runs. And not only just that, just show how that eats up clock and really just tears away mentally at this FSU defensive line and defensive unit in general, but it also helps out Chandler Morris, who had an ailing arm the whole game, helped him get a little bit of recovery there for that split moment, let that heal a little bit, and then he eventually was able to rack up the score later on in the game. So that's something that FSU is going to have to fix quick if they want to rebound quickly against Miami. They need to fix up, though, that rush defense, which is just absolutely porous so far.
I mean, Florida State's defense, they're giving up about 296 yards a game. Total yards, I believe, rushing close to 120. And when you have guys like Mark Fletcher Jr. and Marty Brown, they're going to run right through you if Florida State can't get that together.
This two-headed monster in the backfield that we've seen from Mark Fletcher and Marty Brown all season, especially against Florida, it's going to be barbecue chicken. They're going to be licking their fingers against this FSU defensive pass rush. Run defense, rather, if it continues to be the way it is. And Tony White really needs to shore that up. He's now had 2 games that have really been polarizing. That first one against Alabama week 1, where he absolutely just stifled Ty Simpson in this Alabama offense. And then here you go, case in point against Virginia, where Jamari Taylor and Chandler Morris were able to just feast on it. So, also, another thing that I have to say that FSU did not do well was the critical turnovers that were just absolutely costly because Virginia was perfect. They had a 100% red zone conversion rate, which is something that you have to do if you're going to be a team that upsets a number 8 school like FSU going into that game. And FSU definitely needs to take advantage of really fixing that up during this off time that they're getting in the lead up to Tallahassee on Saturday, because that is one thing that is going to cost them. If they get behind early, Miami's never going to let them. Miami's going to hold on to that lead, and they're never going to let them see the light of day.
Yeah, obviously FSU is going to be on their home field. It's going to be a little bit different. That student section in Charlottesville, it's pretty much right on the field and definitely made an impact towards the side of Virginia. Well, Liam, another thing that I found interesting on Sunday morning when they announced it, College Game Day not going to Tallahassee. I was thinking they were. I mean, it's Florida State versus Miami, 2 ranked teams, but they decided to go to Tuscaloosa instead.
Zach, do you watch UFC at all?
I don't, actually.
So a big saying in MMA in general is don't leave it in the hands of the judges. Because even though I do believe FSU should have gotten the game day and people should be in Tallahassee tailgating at 4 a.m. in the morning on Saturday morning, I believe it is also at the same time justifiable that Alabama did get this. After what we saw last year between Alabama and Vanderbilt, there is a lot of hype going into this matchup, but I believe what more of it is that it's politics. There are some crybaby Alabama fans whining to ESPN after not getting the game day when it went to Happy Valley last week when Penn State took on Oregon and lost. And I believe that even though that was the right decision by the ESPN crew, those fans down south didn't believe so. And now they're kind of spiraling ESPN. They're trying to pander almost to that Alabama crowd. And so when they had the opportunity to give it to them because FSU faltered, they went ahead and did that. And I believe because FSU left that crack in the door open, ESPN took advantage. And really, if they won that game, there is no other way this could have gone. Right? It was a 7:30 ABC primetime game. Even ABC recognized, hey, this is the marquee matchup of this weekend. And the stars were really aligned for this to be a top 5 matchup. You had LSU, Penn State, all these teams, Georgia losing, who were in the top 5 initially going into week 4. But because they all lost, Florida State easily could have propelled from the number 8 seed to at least number 5. I could even see them going up to number 4. But instead, that's not what we're getting. They fell all the way down to number 18, which is a crime in and of itself. And now here you go, the 3 seed versus the 18 seed instead of a top 5 matchup. And the ESPN goes ahead and gives it to the number 10 versus the 16 seed, which, by the way, that also doesn't make sense because if you look at the aggregate, right, from a math standpoint, 26 is more than 21. So still, the better ranked matchup on paper still is FSU Miami.
Well, Liam, you really did the math there. If you asked me to do some math, I wouldn't be able to. But I mean, you're gonna have Lee Corso in Tallahassee too. I believe they're gonna honor him at FSU in some capacity. So they could have done something with him, maybe perhaps that we're not gonna find out because it's obviously going to Tuscaloosa. And I think I agree with you. I think if FSU won that game, it would have been at FSU, and Miami would have been featured on College Game Day as that team that's playing FSU. They would have been featured on College Game Day twice in that primetime matchup.
And I think Kirk Herbstreit's also going to be somewhat happy. He doesn't have to travel down to Tallahassee because they are out for him. They have a bounty on his head after his comments that he made in 2023 or 2022, I believe, when FSU missed out on the playoffs and Kirk Herbstreit advocated for it. You could tell that was a dark moment in December for that fan base, and they did not like any bit of what Herbstreit had to say. So he would have been on the call for that. And actually, that's a correction because he actually still will be on the call for the Tallahassee game. He'll be flying down after going to Tuscaloosa, so he won't be receiving a warm welcome. Let's just say that. He's going to have to probably bring Peter with him everywhere he goes.
Yeah, it's always better with Peter involved.
Right.
What a great dog, and we saw him at Game Day here a few weeks ago.
Good boy.
Yeah. You mentioned the AP rankings a little bit and how you thought, where Florida State shaped up. You want to talk a little bit more about your thoughts on those AP rankings, as it seems like nobody can agree on teams' positionings in those rankings.
I believe I speak for the majority here, FSU fans included, when I say that the AP rankings were even more egregious than the decision that ESPN made. For FSU to go down 10 spots to lose to what's now a ranked team in double overtime away, not all the way down to number 18, that's just a crime. Because if you look at the teams that are above them, there are some guys that just should not be there. For one, Georgia Tech. Are we kidding ourselves? Georgia Tech, the team that had a missed offsides call that won them the game against Wake Forest, a cupcake team in the ACC, a team that they would have lost to if Wake Forest didn't miss that field goal to put them 23-20 up. Multiple times they should have lost that game, and they didn't. They barely got away by the skin of their teeth. And the fact that they're ranked higher than Florida State, that irks me a little bit, and that should irk fans in Tallahassee as well. You also have Iowa State in there, who I guess you should award them to because they're undefeated, but come on. Florida State's beating Iowa State 10 times out of 10 if they play each other. And then Texas, I also take a little bit of issue with because they might have a chance. They have a really strong defense, but still, just from a perspective of the top 25 in general, they should not be number 9. They should not be above Alabama after what Alabama did. Alabama's back now. After losing to Florida State, they beat Georgia last weekend. Alabama, I'd say, is definitely back. Texas is not. That's going to be a horrible matchup when they play Florida, of two quarterbacks that will probably be in the CFL when they graduate. So some overall just really big errors made by this AP committee that they've known to been making errors before, and nothing has really changed. What do you think?
I want to speak to your point about Texas. Texas just has not been as good as they were last year. They've had a pretty manageable schedule. They play Ohio State to begin the year. Besides that, they've played games they're meant to win. I just haven't seen too much from them. It feels like, the people doing the AP poll are still like, oh, this is a Texas team from last year. No, it's not the Texas team for last year. And Georgia Tech, I was watching that game on ESPN last week. I'm like, is Wake Forest about to win in front of 2,000 fans? Or is Georgia Tech about to really lose against the small crowd at Wake Forest? And I was like, come on. Now we got to play some better football. I think Georgia Tech should definitely be behind Florida State. I'll agree with you to that point. And Virginia, very well deserving to make the top 25, the number 24 team, and they're undefeated in the ACC play.
That's a great story with Tony Elliott as the head coach. Came into the season most definitely on the hot seat, and now he's resurrected his career, I'd say. Just a complete 180 from what they were last year. The team that was dying, that was very low in terms of the NIL and the transfer portal, but they were able to galvanize the troops, and look where they are now. Like you said, they are undefeated in the ACC, which is a fun stat because if you look at it initially, you'd be confused. They actually have a loss to NC State on their schedule, but oddly enough, that was a non-conference matchup. They scheduled it at the last minute, and they decided they already have enough conference matchups that they're playing, so they're going to just play this one essentially for fun. Virginia ends up losing. It's not really going to cost them. So great story for Virginia, and I'm rooting for the Cavaliers because I think I'd rather see them personally than a team like Florida State when you get down to Charlotte later in November.
Yeah, Florida State's going to be a tough team to play if Miami doesn't make it to Charlotte. And speaking on that, Liam, who do you think Miami should watch out for on that road to Charlotte if Miami does make it?
Yeah, so the ACC right now is wide open. I'd say there are about 4 or 5 teams that could really contend to make it to that game. Not only you have Florida State and you have Miami. And by the way, in these 5 teams, I am not going to mention Clemson at all. They are dead as dead can be. Dabo Sweeney, I don't want to get started on him. I think he's totally lost it. Doesn't know how to revive a team in this new era of college football. So Clemson, they're a dead man walking. They're out of here. But the teams that I'm going to mention are Miami, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and also now Virginia and Louisville, who are alive. And that matchup next weekend when they play at 3:30 will be incredible to see. That's something that I think Miami fans should be keeping an eye on while they're after they're done with the tailgates, right? 3:30, usually tailgates are wrapped up by then. Actually, maybe not if it's a night game. So maybe they're just starting, but maybe throw on a TV somewhere. Go and watch Virginia versus Louisville on ESPN2 because that game could really have some huge implications on this ACC race in general. Both teams undefeated in conference play. And then another team I'm going to mention here, a team that does have a loss, but I still think could make some waves, is California. All the way up there in Berkeley with Jaren Kiave Sangapulutele, an incredible freshman year quarterback, true freshman that came in as a 5-star, originally committed to Cal, flipped to Oregon, then went back to Cal after he realized that he could get the starting spot, and he is just tearing it up on the national stage now. Cal could have the opportunity to really play as the spoiler to a lot of teams that are trying to get in there come late November because they have games against Virginia and Louisville back-to-back later on in the month of November. So watch out for that because they could really be upsetting some fan bases there.
No, this might be the oddball here, but Syracuse does have a loss in the ACC. But we know what happened when Miami played them last year at the end of the season. Fran Brown's squad, he's going to throw some tricks up his sleeves, and it should be interesting to see what they do throughout the rest of the season. I know Steve Angeli, he's hurt, but I don't think we can count Syracuse out. That's just, my take on that. Maybe many people may not agree, but I think Syracuse, just something to watch out for the rest of the season.
You can never count out Fran Brown, but I'm still going to defer with you on that because we saw what happened last weekend. They got killed 38-3 by Duke. I think that Ricky Collins, he's still very young and very inexperienced. I think he needs some time to develop before he could really carry this team to the levels that you think they can go. But SMU and Duke could also really be in the mix there. You just never know.
Liam, now the moment we've all been waiting for, all our fans been waiting for, the Miami versus FSU preview. Kick it off for us. What can we expect?
Yeah, so the history between these two teams really speaks for themselves, but to provide some context on the rivalry, they've played each other now for 63 years straight, and it's actually been quite lopsided in one direction over different eras. FSU's won 3 of the last 4 since 2021, and then before that, Miami won 4 in a row from between 2017 and 2020. Then before that, FSU rattled off 7 straight from 2010 to 2016. So as you can see, it just kind of switches back from team to team in terms of dominance. So we're hoping that starting with what we saw last year when Miami whooped Florida State 36-14, that could be the start of a new era where Miami football reigns supreme for years to come. And another reason why this matchup would have been so good if Florida State ended up beating Virginia and was ranked top 5 going into it is because since 1936, the Hurricanes and the Seminoles have met 6 times, and when they've both been ranked in the top 5, and Miami holds a 5-1 record in that span, which means that Miami would have been set up for a lot of success had FSU gotten into that top 5 spot just based on a historical standpoint. But enough of that speak now. Let's get into the present day because this game is unpredictable, and the numbers will tell you that because the line has been fluctuating for the past couple of days. It started off at like 20.5, which I think is absolutely outrageous, minus 20.5 for Miami. I think it's going to be way closer than that. And now more recently got lowered down to about 4.5, went back up to like 6.5, and now it's around that 4.5 region once again. So it's complete uncertainty from the guys in charge there and women in charge about who they think is going to win this game. And I couldn't agree more because it could really go either way.
Miami leading the all-time series 36-33. And in terms of the line, Liam, I think it's going to be close. Like you said, 4.5 does make sense. And it's going to be one of the top matchups of the week. I think if Carson Beck can get it going through the air, that's going to be huge. And getting into the hands of his receivers, watch out for those picks. He does have a few picks in the past few games. And previously, before they played USF a few weeks ago, he went over 185 passing attempts without interception. So we know that Carson Beck's not a guy that's going to throw too many picks if he really hits his guys.
And another important note is that in the post game of that Virginia game that they played on Friday, Coach Mike Norvell's admitted that Florida State basically fell into that trap game narrative. And you could even see that from the mixed bag that we saw from FSU's defense that game, where it was very volatile. They came up with 3 big time interceptions, sure, but they also allowed 211 rush yards and for Chandler Morris to go for 3 touchdowns on the night. So that really just speaks volumes to how really Florida State is boom or bust when it comes to their defense. But I want to talk about our defense to get this preview started because I believe that Miami's D line versus Florida's run game or Florida State's run game will be the biggest matchup to watch for going into Saturday because FSU has one of the most productive offenses in the country under new offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn. He's basically transformed this team into an old school unit that can now just methodically wear opponents down on the ground, taking it back to the basics. The bread and butter of his schemes revolve around getting to the edges and turning the corner. And he's able to do this by keeping defense guessing with his deep bag of different motions and run pass option plays that really keeps teams in check. And then once that gets established, he's able to turn defenses on their heads by taking deep shots downfield to weapons like Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White. So pretty scary if you've been watching Florida State football if you're a Miami fan because they've been running up the score on some lower level teams, and they even did it against Virginia, putting up 38.
I mean, Liam, in terms of Miami's defense against that Florida offensive line, you got two of the best like pass rushers in the country, and Hakeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain Jr., who had the highest PFF grade through the first 4 weeks of the regular season, I believe a 95.8. And like we've mentioned a lot, he's in these talks for the Heisman, but Mohamed Toure playing a big role in the past few games. Bryce Fitzgerald's 2 interceptions. It's going to be a good test for this Miami's defense this week.
You mentioned Mohamed Toure. He'll probably play a pivotal role for Miami because he'll be the spy to Tommy Castellanos. Florida State, as a unit offensively, ranks second in the country in rushing yards per game and third in explosive rushing plays. And that's all because of Castellanos and that committee they have of Gavin Sawchuk, Usman Kroma, and then Jalen Lucas on those reverse jet sweeps and motions. But like on the flip side, like you said, we have Ruben Bain. We have the ultimate game wrecker who is right now probably the best player in all of college football if you look at the PFF grades. In total, Miami is 12th in expected pass attempts or EPA per rush allowed on defense. I actually don't know what EPA stands for, but that's what the stat says. I'll be honest. But basically, like the ground offense works best for FSU when they are playing with a lead, right? That's how ground games work. And so that's why I think it's imperative that Miami jumps out onto the scoreboard first and puts pressure on Malzahn to change his schemes and tempo because of how he runs so much on the ground. They're going to need to open it up. Castellanos is going to need to start making some throws against the secondary if that turns out that way. And that's why, I mean, sounds pretty like it won't happen, but I'm going to say it. I think that the coin flip might be pivotal. Like that's so ridiculous to say, but the coin flip could really determine a lot of things because if Florida State gets it, they're going to want to have the ball first. They're going to want to go down and try to get some points on the board first. So when they continue to play with their own scheme and tempo at their own pace. So that's why I think Miami, it'd be nice if they were able to stop that by getting the right call on the coin flip.
Miami against USF, Byron Brown, a very mobile quarterback. They were able to stop him pretty well, and that type of defense is going to be needed against Tommy Castellanos and his offense, who run a bit of a similar style. Obviously, FSU and ACC, that's a Power Four conference, so some of their schemes are going to be a little bit different than USF. But Liam, anything else you want to speak on in terms of the preview? I think kind of talk about the atmosphere a little bit.
Yeah, I think we should talk about the atmosphere. I just do want to say, for my closing thoughts on this run game for FSU, I do believe that they're slightly overrated. They really don't have anything going for them on the offensive line, and so I believe Miami will have a big advantage there because if they can win the line of scrimmage, which they always have done in the games that they've played, and I don't think this will be much different because the O-line that FSU has is probably worse than Notre Dame and Florida. They rank 60th in run blocking grade. I don't think Florida State stands much of a chance, especially when they have so much success on the edges, and that's where our best players in Mesidor and Bain play. But yeah, like you said, let's get to the atmosphere of this because that is an intangible factor that will play a big role considering Miami has never left Miami in the 4 games that they've played, because Doak Campbell, it's a different beast. Those fans can get rowdy, and we're really going to count on Carson Beck and Akeem Mesidor, those 6-year veterans, to step up for this team in terms of leadership and poise and composure. Carson Beck, I will say though, there's no other quarterback I'd rather have for these high pressure atmospheres, these big moments, because he is SEC proven, right? He's won in Austin, he's won in Auburn, he's gone to Neyland Stadium and grabbed a win there. He's played in Tuscaloosa, so I think by getting adapted to those SEC environments, he is ready.
Liam, once I see Chief Osceola running or on his horse going down the middle of the field to start the game, I that place is going to be a madhouse. I mean, it is going to be so loud. It's going to be over the 90 decibel soundboard that we see for safe film. And I pull that in from my production class. It's going to be a madhouse. But I think to close it out, we got to go score predictions.
Yeah, so I'm gonna say I've always been pessimistic so far in my predictions. I've always had Miami not covering, and they have covered. And I'm not gonna change my philosophy on this one. I'm sorry. I do think that Florida State is gonna make this a game, and I'm gonna say, well, now that I think about it, I think that they will cover, but it will only be by a score. I'm gonna give Miami the edge here, 31-24 in a high scoring game where Beck's gonna have a clean pocket. He's gonna have a lot of time to throw. This is an abysmal pass rushing unit. FSU ranks 93rd in that category. And it's not like their secondary is giving them much support either because they rank 82nd in pass coverage. So I believe that we will feast on the offensive end, but I believe Castellanos and company will put up a fight. And I believe that they will go down and threaten this game and bring it pretty close. So I'm going to say 31-24 is my final score.
I'm gonna go 31-17, same amount of points in terms of what Miami's gonna score. I think there is more of a margin there. I believe Miami's gonna show why they're one of the best well-rounded teams in the country, and by the end of this game, definitely is still a top three ranking. But when we come back, we're gonna end this episode out talking to Will McBroom, the V89 Sports slash WVFS Tallahassee Sports Director at Florida State University and host of the Tomahawk Talk and the Majority Decision podcast. We'll be right back in just a few minutes. Well, we want to thank you for your time for coming on. How are you doing?
Doing absolutely fantastic. Super glad to be here. Want to thank y'all for having me on and excited to get through the rest of this week and get to Saturday because that is going to be just a crazy atmosphere for this game coming up.
And it helps in that there's been so much hype in the build up to this game. It's hate week for both schools, and especially for the city of Tallahassee, it feels like the entire city has really just been spit in the face by ESPN and the Associated Press after what transpired Friday night on week 5. Can you talk to us about your sentiments about what happened with ESPN Game Day and the ranking you guys received after the game?
Yeah, I think the general consensus around Tallahassee is that ESPN, well, I think there is an understanding that ESPN, if Florida State is undefeated, Miami's undefeated heading into this game, game day's here because you can't really avoid it at that point. But I also think the general feeling is they wanted any excuse not to come to Tallahassee. It kind of felt like, and on one hand, you kind of understand based on the animosity that there was between, and still is, I mean, re-heightened now, but between FSU, the fan base, Kirk Herbstreit kind of being the main target of that criticism. But at a certain point, with the way that ESPN has almost leaned in at times with, last year, obviously, Florida State very easy to make fun of last year, but ESPN, a lot of guys on there seem to take a lot of opportunities, McAfee, Herbstreit, guys like that. And that's just kind of continued all the way through to the narrative around the Alabama game. And even before Alabama beat Georgia, it felt like ESPN had immediately jumped to, well, Alabama just didn't play a very good game in that one. Like, just seeming to want to discredit Florida State there. I understand that Alabama Vanderbilt is a, big game, two ranked teams. Vandy obviously is a great story being undefeated this far into the year. There's always a lot of politics that goes into the game day decision making. It's never really just the best game. Miami hosted when they played a 1-2 Florida team earlier this year. So to me, the rivalry element combined with the fact that they haven't been to Tallahassee in 11 years, they go to Tuscaloosa pretty much every year. Nothing about the decision really made much sense to me, but I mean, it's just going to kind of add fuel to the fire, I think, of the fan base when Herb Street and Chris Fowler are calling this game on Saturday.
I'm gonna agree with you there. Did you come away from UVA feeling better or worse about the Seminoles' chances versus Miami than you did before Friday night's game?
It's hard not to come away feeling worse. I think there is an element to it where coming off a loss like that, where at least defensively you got embarrassed, it gives you a lot of areas that you know you have to improve on, so that can help you going in. But watching that defense, I mean, just poor tackling. Uh, what really stood out to me was second half. You watch Chandler Morris injure his thumb. It's clear through that drive that he's not going to be throwing the football, and still Virginia was able to just run it straight up the gut against FSU down to the goal line. A lot of guys, especially in that linebacker room, who just struggled, and a guy like Earl Little at safety, who was a real standout in that Alabama game, had his worst game of the season easily. So while I think it's not overall reflective of what FSU's defense is going to play like, it's hard not to watch that game and think, wow, if Virginia can do this, then what is a team like Miami going to do? On the flip side, I think the offense did give you a lot of reasons for optimism. I think the run game all year has been great. Seeing a guy like Deuce Robinson, in spite of the last play ending the way it did for him, but having a huge game as the wide receiver one for FSU, there are reasons to think the offense is better than maybe I thought going in. But overall, yeah, I don't feel nearly as good as the team about the team going in as I did previously.
I like how you mentioned that though, because there definitely is a silver lining for Florida State. Castellanos was incredible. Deuce Robinson is showing why he could definitely be a real headache against this Miami secondary. So with that being said, do you think that this offense will see more success by sticking with Malzahn's option schemes on the ground that have been working all season and have made them the second best rushing team in the country? Or do you think that they should utilize the downfield passes more and target Miami secondary, which is the weaker out of the two groups between them and their D line?
I'd like to see them test that back end for Miami because I mean, you look at DJ Lagway having a really down year. Byron Brown obviously is a good G5 quarterback, but it's still a G5 team in USF. CJ Carr is really the only quarterback who's fully tested that secondary, it feels like, and had a decent amount of success in that Notre Dame game. It's obviously nothing compared to, what Miami was doing back there last year, but I think there's definitely success to be had there. But I also think you're going to have to rely on that run game to set that up. FSU goes, I mean, seven deep at running back right now. I will say Roydell Williams is back from injury, which, if you ask anybody around Tallahassee, they're not super excited about that. He has been RB1 throughout all the way through spring. Nobody's really sure why. I mean, he's a talented guy, but he doesn't really have, he's not overwhelmingly fast, overwhelmingly strong. Doesn't really have that to his skill set. But the guys behind him, Usmani Chroma, especially the freshman that FSU's had this year, has really impressed in limited reps. Gavin Sawchuk had a big fumble against Virginia, but he's been a really tough runner. Get guys like Keziah Holmes, Sam Singleton, who have been in the program for quite a while. So I think it's imperative to stick with the run game, which is never a doubt under Malzahn. But if they don't open up that deep passing game, it's hard to trust that Florida State offensive line to just continually win against guys like Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor for Miami.
With that
Yeah,
being said, do you think they could still be as potent in terms of the running backs, even if FSU does lose in the trenches? Because similarly, this is a completely different profile that the secondary is facing. But then on the other side of that, Florida State has never gone against such a formidable D line like Miami.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think maybe I'm the more pessimistic one. And on the show on Monday, I was actually somehow, strangely, the only one of our panelists to pick Miami to win the game. I don't see FSU being able to, you know, I think you have to rely on the passing game just opening up that defense because defensive line wise, FSU's O line is impressed so far this year. Herb Hand's done a great job with that group, but it's a lot of transfers. It's good players. Miami has NFL guys on that D line. I I don't think that Florida State's run game is going to be able to keep up in that way. I mean, you're going to have to see a lot of what Gus already does, but a lot of motion, reverse, get the ball to Makai Danzy, who's been a huge playmaker this year for FSU from the receiver position as much as you can, any way you can, and just try and keep him off guard. But it's going to be tough if you're talking just beating those guys man to man. And the same, I mean, on the flip side for the other lines of scrimmage as well.
Do you think Carson Beck will be prepared for Doak, considering his experience in loud SEC atmospheres, or is Tallahassee a different beast when it comes to crowd noise?
You know, Carson Beck, I watched a lot of Georgia games as well over the course of the time he was there. I think he's prepared because he seems to regulate very well. The atmosphere doesn't really seem to phase him. My questions usually come more in how the rest of the team is going to do, considering Miami has been in Coral Gables all year, hasn't had to face a road game until now. But I will say, if there were ever an atmosphere to phase a guy like Carson Beck, it's probably going to be Doak on Saturday night. It's going to be a packed house in a rivalry game that seems to always, I mean, over the last 15 years, has always been one team's doing really well and the other one's middling, or, at best, like they're both just not very good, no matter which team it is. So to have it top 25 matchup still, I expect it to be even more raucous than the Alabama game, and that atmosphere had a huge impact there. So we'll see, but I trust Beck to stay calm in terms of the external factors. That being said, if FSU can generate some pressure, I've also seen that can turn him into a very different quarterback than when he has a clean pocket.
And do you think that defensive coordinator Tony White's going to be able to do that with this team? Because it's been night and day between this Alabama game where they absolutely just stifled Ty Simpson in Alabama versus what we saw Friday night with Chandler Morris going off for 3 rushing touchdowns. What's the barometer on the feeling around Tony White as a defensive coordinator and his abilities right now?
Uh, like you said, it's completely up and down. We really have no idea what to think at this point after those two differing results there. But I mean, one thing, like they are going to tackle better than they did in that Virginia game. That was an anomaly, I think. I think pass rush is the biggest concern because outside of Daryl Jackson, who hasn't had his best year so far, but I think still has obviously that ability that we've seen previously. I don't know where else that pass rush is really coming from. James Williams has kind of struggled to get much of anything done. That hasn't stopped him from being all over social media, but he hasn't really made plays on the field this year. Guys like Diamante Diggs, the Desirs, it's just kind of again a bit of a cobbled together group of talented guys, and you hope that after not putting Chandler Morris under any pressure at all, you would have a really inspired effort. But I don't really know if that's going to matter when you're going against that Miami offensive line that I've said multiple times is easily the best in the country. Like that's the biggest concern for me is unless you get, just some really strong blitz packages dialed up, I don't know how FSU is really going to put much pressure on Carson Beck. And at that point, you're just relying on the corners to just be locked down.
For our Miami fans listening, give us like an X factor for one Florida State offensive player and defensive player.
All right, so offense, I'm actually going to go with Squirrel White. And you could kind of put a couple different names at this spot, just a second receiver, because Deuce Robinson has clearly established himself as wide receiver one. Outside of there, there's not a second guy that Castellanos has really shown a lot of comfort with yet. The exception maybe being Makai Danzy, but all of his, non kind of short routes or behind the line of scrimmage were against Kent State, so I don't really know if you take too much from that. Could be Danzy, could be Squirrel White, could be Luann McCoy, but you need a second receiver to kind of take a little bit of that off of Robinson and really help open up this passing game. On the defensive side, I'll go to Jeremiah Wilson, probably at that other cornerback spot. I mean, Jabril Rawls has played out of his mind to start the year. I don't expect him to have any issues, whether he's matched up with Malachi Tony, CJ Daniels, any of those guys. It's about Wilson, highly buzzed about guy out of Houston, has played pretty well so far this year. This is going to be arguably the biggest test he's faced because Alabama, I mean, Jeremy Bernard was sensational in that game, but Ryan Williams kind of a non-factor. Uh, Maybe more so because he wasn't playing super step up. And then, you give your defensive line a little bit more time to maybe generate some of that pressure we were talking about. I think that can be a pretty huge difference there.
And we talked earlier about how this is just going to be an absolutely electric crowd that Miami's going to find a hard time playing against. And part of that is because they are now riled up and have a team that they can get behind after last year going 2-10.
Ooh.
It's been such a complete 180 from this Florida State team. So, in your opinion, who do you think has been the biggest or the bigger catalyst of change for Florida State in terms of culture in the locker room and setting standards? Do you think it's been their quarterback Castellanos, or has it been the addition of Gus Malzahn?
It's a really tough question, and the cop-out answer would be you can't fully have one without the other, but I would go with Castellanos simply based on kind of the more intangible factors of how vocal he's been. I mean, in the offseason, obviously everybody talked about it, including me on my show. I've made a bit of a bigger deal than I needed to, apparently, about his comments about Alabama, and I don't see them stopping me, and they don't have Nick Saban to save them. Turns out he was right. That's on me, guys. But uh, I think that vocal leadership and going out there and proving it, and just the toughness too. I mean, he as much as it worries fans every time it happens. This isn't exactly a guy who slides. Like, he wants to get hit. He wants to play physical out there. And as much as I don't want to rag on DJU from last year because he's a really good guy, I think leadership comes in a lot of different forms, but he wasn't vocal out there. He was kind of afraid of that sort of contact whenever he was on the field. Like, you just didn't have that sort of inspiration. It was like Tommy's the kind of guy at quarterback that if you go down 10, it feels like the entire team isn't worried in the least. And we just didn't have that with DJU at all last year. So I think that's been the biggest thing there. But Gus, it's just more an on the field standpoint of, hey, we had all these running backs with the exception of Chroma last year and Sawchuk, and we just couldn't get them the ball. Like that, there was just no run game to speak of. Gus takes that and flips it completely on its head, obviously based on the way he runs offense. So you could make an argument for either one of them, but I'd go with Tommy there.
Before we go, we have to get your score prediction for the game.
Oh yeah, no, this isn't this. I want to go full homer here. I really would like to just act like Florida State's going to march in and show Miami a test they haven't seen yet. I can't do that. That being said, I think it's going to be a really close game, and I actually expect Florida State to go into halftime with a lead. I think Miami's going to be a little bit thrown off initially by that environment. I expect the defense to play a lot better, especially right off the bat. But I do think those lines of scrimmage are just going to wear down FSU by the end of the game. Give me Miami 31-27 in this one. But I think it's going to be a great game, and I think these are the two best teams in the ACC.
Well, me and Liam both said Miami's going to score 31 points and win the game as well. So that kind of works out there. But with that, we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Will, and let's hope it's a good game this weekend.
Absolutely. Again, thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Will. Appreciate it.
Another great episode of TMH Sportscast. Miami versus Florida State. It's going to be a great matchup. Go watch at 7:30 on ABC. Liam, always great to do with you. For myself, I'm Zach Cohen. We want to thank you, and we'll see you back next time.